Greetings and welcome to another episode of Conversations at the Intersections, a podcast where we have great conversations at the intersection of justice, identity, and faith. I am Reverend Kelly X, the Director of Racial Justice Ministries here at Spirit Bennett Center, and I am so honored today to be joined by our special guest, Dr. Carlotta B. Berry, Carlotta A. Berry, a professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Hullman Institute of Technology and the Dr. Lawrence Giacoletto Endowed Chair for Electrical and Computer Engineering. Dr. Berry is the first Black woman to earn tenure, full professor, and endowed chairship at Hullman. Thank you so much for coming and joining us today for this conversation. You have such a powerful bio dealing with so many issues, not just in engineering, but most importantly in engineering, but also how you have created space for you to not just be the first, not just to be the only, but to be the first. I think that's more important than being the only. We want to be the first so that there are many more women, many more people who are part of marginalized groups that can come into STEM. And so through your work as a professor, as you've been teaching, and the different organizations that you have created, you have created more and more space for people of color, for women, for people of different identities to be a part of the STEM community. And so first, I want to ask you, as the first Black woman to earn tenure, and all of those things that you have done at Hullman, what has been your personal journey to be able to get to this place where you are right now?
So thank you so much for having me. And I love to talk about this topic. I get asked about it a lot because I like to tell people that I really am a Black girl unicorn. The number of women with PhDs in engineering who are actually in academia is probably less than 200 in the United States. So in all STEM, that might be 2% of the community of the population. Black women or Black people, even in general in STEM, are not very well represented. That's a big part of what I do. So when I talk to people about my journey, it started because my mom was a school teacher and so was my grandmother. And so I really just wanted to be an educator. I went to Hume. So when I was a high school student, I had expressed that I wanted to be a high school math teacher. And I had a career counselor who told me that with my math and science grades, I should really consider engineering. And at the time, I honestly just did not know what an engineer was. I went to the library because I had no cell phone, no internet access. And engineering did look cool. It did use math and science, but I didn't know any engineers. I was very unfamiliar. So I think a big part of my journey to engineering was based upon my lack of knowledge, not realizing the challenges that Black people and that women face in those careers, in those classes, being one of the only, being one of the first, not knowing a lot about microaggressions and bias and systemic bias and things like that. It kept me going. I think a big part was going to Spelman College first. Spelman College really helped to develop my identity and to build me up as a Black woman and being able to know that, I deserve to be in those spaces. And that strength helped me when I got to Georgia Tech and got to those other universities and had people question whether I was affirmative action was why I was there, whether DEI was why I was there, whether I was qualified, whether I was competent, etc. I had the confidence to go, no, I'm meant to be in these spaces. I do think it was probably better for me not to be aware of some of the challenges that Black women in STEM face for me. But part of my mission now is to not only help educate the community and those coming behind me, but to give them the resources to be successful despite that.
Wow, thank you. I thought you were going to say one thing, but you said something different. When you started speaking about being at Hume High School in Nashville, and you said that your advisor has said that based off of math and science, you should be an engineer. I thought they were going to say the opposite. That based off of your grades that you couldn't do, and to me that says a lot about what happens when our guidance counselors, our teachers, those who are working with our children see their capacities even beyond what they do. And so, what is your approach to mentorship and advocacy now? It seems like based off of that one small conversation that changed the trajectory of your life, and as a result, it looks like it also helped you to change the lives of others. What can you talk about your how you mentor, how you advocate for women, for Black people, for diversity within engineering?
Absolutely. But I want to rewind a little bit based upon something you just said. I'm going to build on that and then I'm going to answer your question. So that
Come on.
conversation about somebody
Mhm.
telling me I shouldn't be in engineering happened later. So
Okay.
I was in high school in Inroads when it was an Inroads career counselor
Yeah.
who told me I should consider engineering.
Mhm.
Inroads program to help particularly Black and Brown students get prepared for careers in not just STEM, but in corporate America. So we did internships, we did summer, trainings on dress for success, how to do interviews. We got internships, etc. So it was a career counselor there who did that, which that was a majority Black organization at the time. But it was at
Right.
Georgia Tech where I actually had somebody tell me I didn't need to be an engineer. So after 3.5 years at Spelman, I had to do 2 years at Georgia Tech to get my engineering degree. And at that point, it was over 5 years and I had run out of financial aid. So at different points in that journey, I was working
Mhm.
multiple jobs. I was tutoring math at Spelman. I was a hostess at the spaghetti factory. I was answering phones at
Mhm.
Ticketmaster. I worked at Sears Credit Card Central, you name it. So because I was not only going to engineering school, but working multiple jobs, my grades did start to suffer a little until
Mhm.
I learned how to do the networking and the resources that I try to encourage my students to do as a mentor. And it was during that time that I had to apply for additional financial aid that I went to talk to an administrator at Georgia Tech who asked me my GPA. And when I shared with him what it was, he told me, I don't think you're here with a good plan with those grades. And I think you should just go.
Mhm.
And that did not sit well with me, considering I had already invested over 4 years of my life into this engineering degree. I had the math degree from Spelman. So it was
Mhm.
that, as well as a few other negative interactions with professors that changed the trajectory from I'm not just going to be an engineer, but with my 2.5 GPA, I'm someday going to also be an engineering professor. Because I
Right.
think that students that look like me, women, Black and Brown students, needed to see a professor in engineering who was engaging, who was involved, who wanted to support them no matter what their grades or their GPA was, to help them to achieve their goals and their dreams. Because I know how it felt to have someone to doubt my abilities, because I knew it wasn't my
Mhm.
ability, but my circumstances that was dictating my academic struggles. In fact, once I was able to get one job and I was able to join study groups and get the resources I need, my grades were better than some of my classmates. But
Mhm.
so what happened was I then graduated and went to work at Ford Motor Company, because although I had decided I wanted to be an engineering professor, a 2.5 GPA was not that attractive for grad school. And I also had a lot of debt. I had a lot of student loan debt. So I worked at Ford Motor Company and I worked at Detroit Edison to pay down some of my debt. And I was thinking about, God, how am I going to get this graduate degree? Because even as an engineer, I was still mentoring the interns. I was still tutoring middle school and high school kids through the National Society of Black Engineers, Detroit Alumni
Mhm.
Extension. And what I did was I was looking in the newspaper one day, and there was a professor at Wayne State who had gotten a grant, and it had to go to a Black person to fund their master's degree. And so
Mhm.
that's how I ended up getting a master's degree while working nights at Ford. I went to school during the day at Wayne State. And I got a 4.0 in my graduate program so that when I would apply later to Vanderbilt, that was what they
Mhm.
looked at, my GRE scores and my master's degree GPA instead of my undergraduate GPA.
That's really, really awesome. And what I hear in that is, I hear a couple of things. I hear everybody doesn't have the resources to be able to pay for school, and as you're
Right.
working and doing all the things to get you there, it can impact the capacity or what might look like capacity because you're
Yeah.
working. How much, and so to
Yeah.
be able to do that, to motivate, to stay motivated on top of that, I think is also pretty awesome.
Yeah.
You were You co-founded Black. Sorry, I accidentally did. Hold on one second. Let me adjust this. There we go. I'm gonna start right there. You co-founded Black in Engineering and Black in Robotics in 2020. What motivated you to establish these organizations, and what impact have they had on creating inclusive communities within the STEM fields?
So interestingly enough, 2020 was a very life-changing year for me. There were several things that happened. The first one is I had applied to go on sabbatical that year. And then in March, when the pandemic came and everyone had to go home, I started sabbatical early. And it was that summer that I started to connect with a lot of academics and a lot of backgrounds on social media, Twitter, Instagram, etc. And then the George Floyd killing happened. And right around that time, several other things happened as well.
Mm-hmm.
Including Black Birders Week, because Christian Cooper was racially profiled in New York City in the Central Park when Amy Cooper called the police on him for asking him to leash his dog. When he asked her to leash her dog because he was taking pictures and bird watching, and it was scaring the birds. So after the Black bird watcher situation, it kind of birthed the Black in X movement. Black in STEM had always been very, very active on social media, but Black in the Ivory began to trend, which was the stories of Black academics who worked in the ivory tower and about some of the negative experiences we face being trailblazers and double taxation and the double bind, etc. And so out of that, a lot of communities were formed, including, Black AF in STEM, Black in microbiology, Black in astro, Black in gerontology. It goes on and on. And so a group of us started Black in Engineering. And we really wanted to address, as a lot of people did, what we had witnessed from the George Floyd situation, and to say, we're more than just academics, we're also Black people moving in these spaces. So we not only created a call to action, but we started a media campaign, and our video went viral. It was a Black academics talking about that, I could be George Floyd as well, even though I have a PhD. So that was a real moving moment for us. And so we wanted to continue that. So Black in Engineering still continues to, and Black in Robotics also unique experiences of Black roboticists and how we want to see our work used, because AI and using robots to police communities, marginalized communities, also was challenging, as well as bias in artificial intelligence. So we wanted our voices to be heard in those spaces as well, and talk about that we did not want our work to be used in ways that would work against our communities in their protected classes. For example, people using AI, police officers, in order to arrest people, when we know that artificial intelligence facial recognition is least effective on Black faces, Black and brown faces. So there are lawsuits of people who have sued the police department by using this faulty AI to arrest someone for a crime that they did not actually commit. So a big part of Black in Engineering and Black in Robotics is also to share the technical aspects of our community, but also to advocate for social justice uniquely based upon those skill sets that we have.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And that really makes me think about like the edited volume that you the volume you're part of that you edited, mitigating bias in learning machines. I think, to be very honest, I think I know what engineering is. Like putting together machines and making sure that they work and all of that. I know, I'm assuming it's, bear with me. You got hardware and software, and you got the hardware piece, and then when we think about AI as a software, making coding and things, I know I'm using words that I'm probably not using it properly. But what I also, so if you need to fix some of that, I get it. But I think part of what happens is that because we can feel so not disconnected with the language and the terms of it, we don't understand how it impacts us as it pertains to issues around race and gender, and that there can be issues of bias. I know one of the most frustrating things that I experience is going to the bathroom and just trying to wash my hands, to be able to get soap and water and a paper towel can be so difficult because the software or the machine, I'll just say it that way, doesn't recognize my hand as a hand. And so, can you talk more about like different strategies that need to be used, or different ways that you have done work to make sure that race and gender are used to benefit people of color and women, as opposed to the ways that we have been ignored in scientific areas?
Absolutely. I actually used the example of the soap dispenser with my freshman engineering students, and do not be ashamed of not knowing what engineering is. We have students who decide to go to engineering school because they were encouraged by their parents who don't know what engineering is. So, an engineer is basically someone who uses math and science to solve the world's problems and to make processes better. And there are millions kinds of engineers, and based upon the type of engineer you are, that's specifically what you do. So, as I'm an electrical engineer and robotics engineer, I use electronics, controls, software, and robotics to improve processes and to improve and to solve the world's problems. So essentially, what's happening, even with that soap dispenser and with the AI, is they're training their designs on incomplete data. In other words, since the majority of engineers are white men, or male, then a lot of times when you see these things happening, they have not trained their software on enough data of brown and black faces of women. If you're talking about some of the systems, chatbots that listen to people with accents, or maybe women who have higher pitched voices, etc. So a big part of it is diversifying STEM and having a diverse community in the room and in your data set. So what's going on with that soap dispenser is infrared sensors sometimes do not work well on darker colors. And so the light may be absorbing our skin color instead of reflecting it. What they need to do is to have a diversity of sensors on that soap dispenser that can recognize light and dark skin, and also to do a sufficient amount of testing on different hues of skin color before you deploy it. It's not ready to go live if you haven't tested that it works on a broad swath of the community. So a big part of that is having those diverse voices in the room, using diverse people as test subjects on your designs before they go live, and make sure that you are always considering bias, and to make sure that people from different protected classes are also going to be able to use your system without being prejudiced against it. That's really a big part of it.
Mm-hmm. And to your point about being able to use a broader test system and have more data, that would then require for more Black folks and brown folks to then participate in studies. I know one of the things that has been difficult is trusting of the medical, of science, given that oftentimes when we have been used in studies, it's not always been to our benefit. And so I'm wondering, what have you done in that? I know, for example, the church that I pastor is being a part of working with to collect data on what happened during the pandemic and how we were affected by that, and helping scientists get access to people because they trust their pastors. And so I'm wondering what other strategies are being used so that we can be a part of the data, and then that data could be used to benefit us.
I think we all think about the Tuskegee experiment a lot, and how we can't just trust people when they say they're doing an experiment that's supposed to quote unquote benefit our community. I think a big part of it is transparency, full transparency. What are you going to use this for? What is it going to be used for? Show me examples of studies you've done in the past. How did it benefit my community? How were we helped? Because we've also seen examples, even in the medical industry, of how someone does a study and comes back and says Black people don't feel pain like other folks do. We know that's not true. And it law, unfortunately, a Black woman goes to the hospital and says she's in labor, and they won't give you as much pain medicine as they would a white woman. So a big part of that is showing me, what have you done in the past to advocate for these communities, to make sure that you are actively benefiting us and making sure that there's not bias that's going to later hurt us. How am I going to be protected? How is my data going to be protected? A big, step forward for that was the Institutional Review Board, or the IRB, that most researchers have to use when they want to use people to do any kind of testing or evaluating on anything in a community, for that very reason, because we don't trust. And we shouldn't, from what we've seen in the past. Henrietta Lacks, and what
Right.
happened to her cell. So there's a lot of stories about what happens when researchers and scientists are not transparent. So a big part of that, and to gain my trust, is to know, what is this study about? What do I have to do? How is it going to be used? And what have you done in the past?
Yes, that is very important to be able to know that the researcher is someone who is trusted and is doing the work and not just trying to gather information, because we know that data could be used any type of way if you really
Absolutely.
want to, right? And so, in addition to being an engineer and a professor, you're also an author. You've
Yes.
written children's books about robots. There's a robot in my classroom. You've also written romance novels as
Yes.
well. Can you tell us about why you decided to write children's books and to write, uh, romance novels about graduate students trying to get their degrees and doing wow in love and all of that?
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about that?
Interestingly enough, the goal was the same. I know it feels very divergent, romance novels and children's books, but the goal was the same. This also happened during that same pandemic. I was talking to some of my colleagues, and we were talking about how we really have got to figure out a way to market STEM to a broader community. We've got to get more Black and brown kids excited about the possibility of STEM, engineering, robotics, etc. And all of this stuff is interrelated to my ultimate goal. My STEM is for the streets, diversifying STEM in order to make it reflect the world that we live in, so that we can address some of these bias solutions, etc. And we talked about that media is a big problem, because engineering has a marketing problem. Because when you think engineer, you think Dilbert, Ivor, Third Rock from the Sun, all of those kind of things, Sheldon. And most of it is predominantly white men, nerdy white men, pocket protectors, glasses, tape on the glasses, no social skills, etc. And we know engineers can be so much more than that. We all knew engineers who were so much more than that. So the mission of the books was to grow in ways that our visibility had not been seen before. We go to technical conferences, we publish in journals. That's preaching to the choir. So taking our STEM to the streets means, how can I increase my visibility with people who may not see me in otherwise? Black in Robotics does STEM workshops online. Black in Engineering had the media campaign on YouTube, and we came up with fictional books that would hopefully then lead to web series or TV shows or movies. And so I first started with the romance novels, and I wanted all my romance novels to have a main character who was a Black woman in a STEM field. So I have a nurse, I have a computer scientist, I have more. But the whole point was to show us living our everyday lives, loving, losing, falling in love, having family issues, having issues on the job, etc. Because I'll meet a lot of people at the airport and they go, "Wait a minute, you're a what? You're an engineer?" And it's like I said, Black girl unicorn. No idea what I do. I'm also a mother. I'm
Mm-hmm.
also a daughter. I'm also a sister. I'm also an aunt, an author. We're multidisciplinary, multi-hyphenated, and we're intersectional. So the books are a way to show all of those aspects of who we are. And as a high
Mm-hmm.
school kid, I love to read romance novels. So since part of that captive audience was getting young people interested, I wanted to write romance novels that were clean enough that a high school kid could read it and go, "Hey, I'm thinking about being a roboticist or computer scientist. So here's a young lady who was doing exactly what I want to be." And so that was a bit of it. And I actually dreamt of so after I was already writing the romance novels, I dreamt about the children's books one night. And people always say to keep a notepad and pen by your bed. I never do that. And I always have these awesome dreams about these awesome movies and stories. And that was one dream that I actually remembered. And there's a robot in my closet, and I saw a little Black girl, and she had a robot in her closet, and nobody else in her family knew STEM, and she wanted to use that robot to teach them about STEM. And so that's where the children's books came from. So it was kind of the same goal as the romance novels, is to normalize seeing girls and Black and brown kids doing STEM.
That is really awesome. That is absolutely awesome. I mean, I was reading Terry McMillan and Elin Harris and all of that in high school. What if there was also an engineer in there as well? That's pretty awesome. And as we talk about diversifying that and broadening what it means to what engineers look like, and that they also look like you, um, that 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 means that you're doing this work of equity, diversity, inclusion. And I'm wondering, how has this current attack on DEI, or diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, that work, how has that affected the way that you show up now in the classroom, how you show up in those different areas of advocacy for others? You call yourself, I love it, and I want to make sure it's there, a noir feminist. Um,
That's right.
Absolutely, I think that is really dope.
Yeah.
um, how do you live into that, um, in this era where it feels like we're just being attacked on every side? That the idea that people of color, that women, that queer people exist are trying to be erased,
Mm.
as opposed to understanding that that diversity provides so much color, so much flavor, so much innovation, and you get more problems solved because there are more answers available in that. And so, how are you navigating this world, in this current state?
Absolutely. It's interestingly enough that I used to teach at Tennessee State, but now I teach at a school that is predominantly white male. So a big part of how
Mm,
it shows up on my job is we have these discussions, like we talked about earlier about the soap dispenser that did not recognize black and brown hands. After the election in January, I think some of my students, I'm in a very conservative state, I'm in Indiana, but I do think some of my students were in shock, and I didn't plan to bring it up at all, to be honest, at
mm,
work, being the only black woman professor on campus. I get asked to speak about diversity and representing black people, black women a lot, and I choose not to because that's a
mm,
lot of invisible and emotional labor for me. But I did have some students who came to talk to me, women, they were mostly women, and we also do have some trans students, and they were like, well, what do I do now? And I think a big part of black people is our resilience because we've always been in these spaces. We've always had to protest and fight to be seen and have our rights, respected, is encouraging them to get up and move forward, and that, they can't be checked out right now. Because, a lot of college students and maybe even some high schoolers who are 18, they talk about we're very checked out on this election. I don't think, they talk about, oh, both candidates were the same, I
mm,
think they're now starting to see how important it was for them not to be checked out. So, a big part of what I do, and I try not to bring politics into conversations with them, is just talking about how important it is to know that your professors have to be able to do research to get tenure
mm,
and be published. And a lot of my colleagues, especially in Black and engineering, were in Ted Cruz hit list that came out in October, where he searched the National Science Foundation and the NIH on words like diversity, belonging, inclusion, and equity, and any funded grants from professors who had any of those, he put them in this big book. And so a lot of my colleagues are now in this book because they do work in diversity, equity, inclusion, and affirmative action. I just recently wrote an op-ed for Times Higher Education that I talked
mm,
about engineering teams that are multidisciplinary with people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different races, and different ethnicities produce better results, better teams, eliminate bias, and benefit everyone because everyone learns how to communicate with people who are not uniform and just like them. So we now are
mm,
back in the stage of having to tell people exactly how important and impactful diversity is. And I think some people are now starting to see that. For example, some white women never realized that they were diversity hires and are now seeing that they're not able to get jobs because when DEI is gone, their jobs are gone because they are the greatest beneficiary of DEI policies.
yeah, yeah.
So there's a lot of education and re-education that we're having to do on every level. And, especially on Twitter, which is very toxic now, you get a lot of people who say things like, you only got that PhD because of DEI, or you only got that because of affirmative action. You weren't as qualified as someone else. And what I would tell them is, even if I wasn't as qualified as someone else, or even if I did get it because of affirmative action, I benefited you by being in those spaces because you learned how to
Right.
interact and deal with somebody who may have a different perspective on these problems than you do. So whether I am or not, I need to be there because DEI and affirmative action benefits everybody who's in that space.
Yeah. That is very, very good. And true. It benefits us all. And it allows for, and we find out that even those who fit into what we consider the regular spaces, even our white, straight male counterparts have diversity in thought. They have diversity in their background that also
Absolutely.
deserve to be lifted up.
People with
If we,
disabilities is a big one right now. People not realizing DEI policies also impacted people with disabilities. Having
yes.
curb cuts on the sidewalk, having elevators in buildings. So
Mm-hmm.
the I think governor of Texas right now, he's talking about getting rid of DEI, and he's in a wheelchair, completely not understanding that DEI also has the A on it for abilities. That
Yes.
making sure people with disabilities are supported as well as people with ADHD, people
Mm-hmm.
with autism. So they have drilled all this down to just race and
Yes.
women, not realizing now, okay,
Right.
if education goes away, that's your child who needs an IEP, and so
Correct.
it's a lot of these things they're missing.
Yes, yes, yes. And it's wild because we forget that we have diversity among us. And so it really throws a wrench in it. One of the things I heard you talk about in one of your talks when you were, I think, speaking to a group of young women in STEM and engineering, and you were talking about how you had been asked to be on a number of different committees, and it felt like in that instance, it was the diversity that we're not interested in, like simply being a woman or a Black woman, that you were being asked to be a part of certain committees um, at work and other places, and how you had to come up with this rule about for one, two no's for every yes. Can you talk about that? And I'm asking it because for me, I can see how there are times when we become very successful and very active in our careers, and then folks begin to ask you, "Can you do this? Can you do this? Do that?" And for me, it sounded like a self care practice. And I'm and can you speak more to that? And not just to that, other things that you do to take care of yourself, being the only, because I know that it's got to be difficult.
Yeah. It's called
And necessary.
yeah.
Yes.
It's called cultural taxation. And I'll be honest, I don't probably do a good a job with the self-care as I should. But one of the things I learned in my job and outside of my job is that people find out that you're an advocate for diversity, that it's important for you to see diversity in STEM. And at my university, not just in the student body who's transient every 4 years, but also in the faculty and staff who are there much longer and impact these communities. And these students do need to see role models who look like them. They need to see people in the administration who look like them as
Mm-hmm.
well. And I found I was being asked to be on every diversity committee, every diversity steering committee, every diversity task force. And it became absolutely exhausting. And I felt like I was repeating myself a lot. And so it's this double bind where you have to figure out, I'm passionate about this and this is important to me, but my career is also important to me. Getting tenure, getting promoted, being retained, becoming an endowed chair, being able to do my research, enter the NSBE students, the National Society of Black and I couldn't do it. I had to start making some decisions. And not only about the rule of one yes for every two no's, but is what I'm doing going to help promote my ultimate mission and goal of moving forward? Do you want my face or do you want my voice on this committee? Am I there because you're bean counting, or I'm there because you really value my opinion and it will be integrated into this discussion? One of the other things I started doing is I had to start looking at who was asking. If the president asked me to be on something, I knew that was going to be important. I had to do it because it was the president. If a colleague was asking, is this something that's going to help my long-term goals as a professor, as an academic, as an author, as a researcher, as a writer? And if not, the answer is no. I recently had a colleague who asked me to be on a committee. I told him no 3 times. He came back the third time and I said, okay, you must really want me on this committee. Therefore, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to make it very clear with you. I'm already overextended. I will come to the meetings. I will give my opinions. I will not be doing any extra emotional labor beyond that. No writing papers, no doing research, no anything. I went to the very first meeting and one of the other people was like, well, I have these papers to read. I wrote him immediately and said, I told you I would share opinions. I'm not doing that. I'm going to have to step down from this committee because it is about self-care and knowing exactly what is important for me to do. And now that I have tenure and I'm full professor, my focus is now beyond my university. So I
Yeah.
do things at my university as well, but I also do things for the Children's Museum of Indianapolis, the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, Girl Scouts,
Yes.
Boy Scouts, Girls and Boys Club, Lay Gems, Nashville, where I'm speaking tomorrow. Things like that are me now having my vision go, I need to impact more than my campus community. So if I have been the NSBE advisor for a decade, if I have been running my diversity scholarship program on campus for a decade, you don't need me as a bean, right, to sit on this
Right.
committee while you decide if they're going to have fish and chicken at the luncheon next week. That's not a good use of my PhD at this point in time in my life. My service is more impactful in other places. I recently got Forbes 50 over 50 because of the work that I do on social media and educating the broader community about diversity in STEM, my STEM being for the streets. That also benefits my university, but I think that is more impactful for my university than the fact you want me on the traffic patrol committee. You know, I don't need to do that.
That is really awesome. Also, shout out to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. Oh my goodness, how much I love. I'm from Chicago, and that would be my daddy-daughter dates with my dad. We would
Oh,
get up and we would go to the Museum of Science and Industry, and I absolutely love everything there. So that was good. I actually, I will be honest, I thought about becoming a chemical engineer. And as much as I did like science and all of that, I think based off of your definition of engineering that I am more of a social engineer and
yeah.
spiritual engineer as a pastor because there are problems and we're using this to find solutions. So maybe I too
Absolutely.
I
You're
am
still an
doing that.
engineer, right? I tell people, if you are problem solving, if you are troubleshooting, if you are coming up to solutions of problems, you're an engineer. That's what engineers do. I
Yeah,
do that with
yeah.
kids. Last couple of events I've done, I've been so exhausted because I've been so spread so thin. I did one for Girl Scouts, and there was something I couldn't figure out, and one of the kids figured out. She's like, "Well, did you think of this?" And I was like, "You know what? You are doing what an engineer does. You don't have the
Yeah.
degree yet, but you're doing what an engineer does. You don't have to, be a grown up to be an engineer. You just have to solve problems and look for solutions." Parents will ask me all the time, how do I get my kid in STEM? Foster their curiosity. If something's
Mhm.
not working around the house, have them try to help you figure it out. My daughter fixed her own video game at 12 years old after I got tired of trying and couldn't do it anymore. And that child wanted that video game. So she figured it out. She went online, she watched YouTube videos, she went and got a screwdriver, and she figured out how to get that Wii working. Right. So
That's
that was
what's up.
important. Her kids will become their own engineers and feed their own curiosity when they see something that they want not working.
When they find a problem that they think is worth being fixed, they will do what it needs to
They
be done.
absolutely will.
That is so awesome. And I want to thank you for joining me on today. And as we wrap up, I just have one last question. What do you see the future of STEM uh, for an Afrofuturistic future for STEM that you're trying to create in this world?
Absolutely.
What's your
I
answer?
actually did a talk about a year and a half ago at the National Museum of African American History and Culture on Afrofuturism in STEM. And of course, for me, I see it as brown. The
Yeah.
world is becoming more global and more brown each and every day. So when I look at it from an Afrofuturistic standpoint, I see the intersections of art and STEM, which is my talk tomorrow, actually. It's not just about STEM and engineering in its purest form anyway, but looking at it from an artistic perspective as well. What I did for my talk is I used AI to imagine what STEM would look like in the future, looking at little black and brown kids as robotics engineers,
Yeah.
as geologists, as archaeologists, as they're solving the world's problems, and intersection with that their artistic abilities as well. Art has always been a part of STEM. Think about architects. Think about architectural engineers. Nobody's going to want to buy your ugly building. Nobody's going to want to ride in your ugly car. So the art and the visuals parts of that have
Gotta
always
be.
been a part of STEM. But I feel Afrofuturism, we are making them more interconnected, making it make sense in a way that all of us can now engage. A lot of that right brain and that left brain, you lose a lot of girls to STEM in fifth through eighth grade because they feel like I want to be a writer or I want to be artistic or I like to dance or I like to draw. So we now have female engineers who are showing how, you can be a hairdresser and integrate electronics into a hairstyle, thinking about like the Bonner shows with the twirling things in bath
Mm-hmm.
and all that in your hair. So just
Yeah.
because you're artistic does not mean you're out of the STEM game. I think the future is where the intersections of those come together. And so there's no more this line and that line, but you're seeing the solutions to your problems being an integration of both.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I could talk to you for hours, but we don't
Thank
have
you.
those. And so if you could share with our guests where folks can find you and your work.
Absolutely. A big part is my website is noirstemminist.com, noirestemminist.com. And I also have, I'm most active on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Twitter. And my YouTube channel. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel to learn about all things robotics and engineering and STEM as well. I have tutorials for children and adults on my YouTube channel, and that's youtube.com/Carlotta Berry. But really, if you just Google my name at this point, it all comes up. I have a Wikipedia page, it'll come up as well as all my social media posts.
Well, thank you so much
Thank you
for
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 having me.
for joining me. It was such a pleasure for you to come here to have a conversation with me at the intersection. Um, Thank you all for joining us,
Thank
and we
you.
look forward to the next conversation we have again. Thank you.
Thank you.